Hi everyone, my name is Angela and welcome to my very first podcast. In this episode, I will be reading a story about Fenrir from the Norse mythology. He was just a wolf cub. Fenrir was his name. His father was Loki, the god of mischief, one of the Aesers, they said, and his mother was a giantess called Angerboda, a mistress unbound by marriage, and he and his siblings were illegitimate children born out of wedlock. One day, Fenrir was playing in the halls of his mother's keep with his brother, a serpent called Jormungandr, and their sister Hel, the girl who was neither dead nor alive, when the gods of Asgard showed up. He was not sure who they were, but he knew that one of them was the Allfather, Odin. The other one he would come to know as Tyr, the only god in Asgard who would treat him with kindness. When the gods saw them, they were determined to take him and his siblings with them. Fenrir saw the gods bind his brother Jormungandr to the striped trunk of a pine tree, while the other gods muzzled him with a muzzle made out of knotted willow and tied a rope around his neck as a leash. They then took his sister Hel to walk beside them, as they were all taken away from their mother's keep. On their journey through Jotunheim, Fenrir realized something. The giants were not following them. Not even their mother had come after them. A thought crossed his mind. What if the giants wanted the gods to take them away from Jotunheim, from the place they called home? He tried to push the thought aside, but that night, as they were all resting in a clearing, he thought of the possibility that not even their mother wanted them, and it felt like a part of his heart was torn away. The only thing that he could seek comfort from was Tyr's touch, as he patted and scratched his furry neck. When they arrived at Odin's hall, the first thing Odin did was take Jormungandr to the shore of the sea that lies beyond all lands, the sea that circles Midgard, and there, on the shore, Fenrir saw Odin throw his brother into the sea. He watched as Jormungandr slither and squirm until he slipped beneath the waves and was lost beyond the horizon. Then Odin ordered Hel to step forward. Fenrir watched intently as Odin stared at Hel before he asked if she were dead or alive. He then proceeded to cast her away into a lightless world called Niflheim. Odin then proclaimed that she will rule over the dead in the deepest, darkest part of the 9 realms. With both of his siblings gone, Fenrir did not know what to do, so he looked to Tyr to see if he would play with him, and maybe, if Fenrir wasn't being too presumptuous, comfort him for the loss of his whole family. To his surprise, Tyr took off Fenrir's muzzle and patted him on the head. From then on, Tyr was his one and only friend and family in that strange and unknown land the Aesers called Asgard. Fenrir was growing fast. As the days went by, he grew fiercer and stronger. All the gods grew wary except for Tyr. He was the only one who wasn't intimidated and was willing to play and feed the Fenrir's wolf. One day the gods held a council and decided to bind Fenrir. They crafted heavy chains and shackles and brought it upon Fenrir. They tried to pass it off as a challenge, a test, to see if the great Fenrir's wolf could escape the binds of the finest shackles the gods have created. So Fenrir allowed himself to be bound. He then strained and struggled until the bindings came off and he broke the Aesir's chains. Then he looked at Tyr, and Tyr looked proud. That pleased Fenrir very much. Twice the gods tried, and twice they failed to bind the great Fenrir's wolf. The third time, Odin commissioned the dwarfs to forge a binding unlike anything anyone has ever seen before. The dwarfs managed to craft a fetter that resembles a ribbon more than a chain from 6 impossible things. The footsteps of a cat, the beard of a woman, the root of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. The gods then went to the shores of the Black Lake, where they called upon Fenrir. They then showed Fenrir their new binding and challenged him again. This time, Fenrir sensed treachery and trickery from the gods. So in an attempt to prove that no treachery was involved, he asked one of the gods to put their hand into his mouth, and he would release it when he succeeded in freeing himself from the binds. The gods looked at each other, and finally Tyr agreed to put his hand in Fenrir's mouth. With that, Fenrir was finally bound. This time he writhed. He struggled, he strained and stretched every muscle to no avail. He growled until his mouth foamed and his eyes flashed. But he still could not free himself. Finally he lay there, exhausted and unmoving. Seeing what was left of Fenrir, the gods snickered. Then their snickers turned into laughter, and Odin's guffaw boomed. But Tyr was silent. It was clear to Fenrir that the gods had no intention of freeing him. Fenrir and Tyr looked at each other. "Do it," Tyr whispered as he closed his eyes. Fenrir bit down on Tyr's wrist, but Tyr made no sound. The gods then bound Fenrir to a giant rock and wedged a sword in his jaw to prevent it from ever closing. They have outdone themselves, they thought, and they were pleased. With that, the treacherous gods of Asgard have sealed their fate. Had they not lied to Fenrir, he would have been a friend of the gods. But fear drove them to do the unthinkable, and they will face the consequences at the end of all things. That concludes this episode. Thank you for listening and have a great day.